That's the question of the hour. What will you do with this? You cannot be neutral. This is not exactly a secret that Jesus' trials were simply an attempt to get peace. They hated him. They were terrified of him. And so there were actually multiple trials, not just one. That's why I say trials in the plural. There were multiple Jewish trials, none of the Gospels say relate all of them. Because the Jews were first trying to figure out how to rail for Jesus through, and that was easier said than done due to how circumspect and wise this was. Then, once they did finally figure out what to do, then they had to get him over to Rome, because of course the Jews were not independent. They weren't governed by Rome, so they couldn't actually keep people in Rome. And so they had to get Rome's consent to execute Jesus. They had to get him tried under Roman law as well. Now, this is, of course, the most evil miscarriage of justice in the history of the universe. Why do I say that? Because there was exactly one period in all human history where we could kill God. And this was it, and that's it. The only man who was truly without sin was judged to have committed the sin of blasphemy. God was in the dock. They judged him to have broken God's laws. Jesus himself demonstrates his composure. He had probably prepared himself as prayer. And he is ready to the most intense trial any human can ever face. Despite the obvious injustice against him, he yelled, he insults, he answered honestly, firmly, and calmly. In fact, the only word is least. But I don't want the Sanhedrin or Pilate to seem like cartoon villains. Yes, what they did is grotesquely evil. I want them to seem human because they do. You can't understand someone actually who believes they think about that. To understand their actions, we're going to end up going back a little bit before the night of that trial, because one of the conclusions they came to, you have to go back to when they decided that one during the trial. They decided what we were going to do before the trial happened. We guys will have that. We will. My point, I'm not trying to make it assume that right was the testimony for the evil. I am trying to make it seem to show you how deceptive sin can be, leading you down a path that ended up doing way more, going way farther than ever intended to. Well, that's what happened to them. They didn't set out to do the most evil thing about it. That's what they did. And of course, the biggest problem is that neither Pilate nor the Sanhedrin believe in Jesus. Pilate is a bit more of an excuse because he's a Roman. They didn't care about this. Sanhedrin, because they have proud of their position. They have power, they have influence, they rather like that. And they are afraid of what this Messiah will do. The Sanhedrin are afraid of the Romans. When the Romans put down a riot, the riot was very effectively put down. If there's nobody breathing left to oppose them, then there's getting the opportunity to die, right? That was generally the way of putting down a riot. So a lot of people know. Rome decided, okay, it's time to crush this. They do that. Pilate is afraid of what will happen to him if the courts don't. Both Pilate and the fear of pride. Both have the fear of man. And these two faults will prevent them from believing in Jesus, receiving eternal life, and ensure that at the most pivotal moment in all of human history, when they had the one chance to stand with the Son of God and with the truth, they're the ones who ended up standing beside them. So, the first thing we're going to do is, if you've been reading along with it, we have been standing at the outside for in the courtyard with Peter. Of course, Peter and I were at the time. But now, we join Jesus inside. In verse 63, it says, now the men who were holding Jesus in custody were mocking him as they beat him. They also blindfolded him and asked him, crucify him. Who would have to struck you? And they said many other things against him, blaspheming him. May I point out that it's wrong about something after the There were informal trials that took place when they talked about it. The actual formal legal trial has yet to be held in the world to be done. You know, if the people who are holding you on trial, if you want, or the trial happens, I think that the trial is not going to go. And of course, part of Luke's point is to show us the trial was a fail. Notice these people are not soldiers, they are youths. They have a vested interest in what's going on. When the soldiers later mocked Jesus, they're rough, hard men bring rough, hard things. They don't really understand what they're doing. These people do understand. No, the reason these people mock and beat up on Jesus is because they are all the hatred against them. They could bottle it up. They couldn't do anything for the whole week. And for months and months before that, Jesus was the problem they continually talk about. What are we going to do with Jesus? He seems to be getting more and more powerful, and we'll keep talking and not getting anywhere. And then the whole week, here he insists even more, and they still can't do anything. Now they can do something. All that teacher, one teacher gets unbelievable, right? Obviously, they don't believe in the Messiah. Their prophesying is making a mockery of the fact of Jesus being a prophet. There's a possibility here. I think Jesus is not a prophet, and he keeps just get on the file. Yeah. What happened? What should happen with the false prophet? They should. But there's nothing to do about it. Or he really is a prophet, in which case you don't have to figure out that he's not a true prophet, never mind the Son of God. He's not a true prophet. That's not the world likes. Now, if you compare them with John, you realize that there were two trials, Jewish trials, that took place before the one that Luke records. Why? Technically, the only one that was legal was the one that Luke tells us about. The others were informal questions. This was the one that the legal trial was the one that was held during the day. Why? That was held at night to be legal. Because we're having to do it under the cover of darkness to tell them doing something you're not supposed to do. Well, they did the trial under the cover of darkness to do. But the daytime trial was a sham because what the witnesses they were looking for, report no witnesses, but no prize one. When we said in the trial, what further testimony do we need? What testimony told us for? Well, just let that down. Whatever happens next, it is obvious from Luke's account, and it's still obvious until all of these together, that whatever happened is because the Sanhedrin is searching for what really happened and they were surprised. No, they were looking for an excuse. They don't care what the charge is. They don't even care about if it's black. They care about finding in jars that will stick. But of course, if you want to find out the motives for a fan trial, you gotta go to the meeting where they decided what the outcome was. And it is not us. John, however, does. By the way, this is a sign when you've got two separate accounts. One helps to make sense of the other one. You got. You want to know what the motive? Well, you got to go to the meeting where they decided to kill Jesus. That happened already. And in John chapter 11, verses 47 to 48, that's the part of the discussion. You can see what they're deciding to do. And the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, what shall we do? For this man worked many times. Anyway, Jesus had just raised Lazarus from the dead. Notice they do not dispute that Jesus did miracles. Some people Jesus does. They could dispute that Jesus did miracles. They wanted they have absolutely no any Christ for anything. They cannot dispute that Jesus does real miracles. So that person can get 4 days. That usually only get better. So, what are we going to do? The man works many signs. The reason he works many signs is because he's from God. Notice we don't even ask that question. Could this man really be from God because he does so many miracles? As Jews, they should be asking that question. Is important to this. As Paul pointed out in some places, that the Jews first sign and the Greeks, Gentiles seek after wisdom. In other words, miracle was not important for Gentiles, very important for Jews. So, you would think that the evidence that they do not deny that Jesus did miracles should be a clue that Jesus is who he claims to be. In fact, he actually told people that that was the conclusion that he should be coming to. He said, if you don't believe me, believe the works that I do. Meaning, the works that I do prove what I say is real, and I really am what I'm trying to do. So, they're not even willing to consider that, and it's not an option on the table. If we let him alone like this, everyone will believe in him. And the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. Notice, they've already decided that it has to be the false Messiah, even though they don't know miracles. Why? Well, remember, we're talking about religious beliefs. And Hebrew is composed of chief priests who are usually Sadducees and scribes who are usually Pharisees. Those two groups believe very differently, did not get along. But at this point, they both hate Jesus so much that they are getting along around. But these are the religious elites, the ones who in practice actually rule over Israel. Whereas the one David, why did David past many centuries cease to be royal and no. Well, it's pride. John 7:49 is a comment from the same group from the Sanhedrin. This crowd does not know the law. In other words, we are the experts. We know the law. Crowds, the people, they're ignorant. Absolutely, they do. They know a whole lot about the law that most people don't know. But notice they think that makes them a moral man. Proud because they don't know the law. We do know the law. We are blessed by God. This is the text of the verse. We are blessed. We do know the law. You know, knowing the law really helps. Otherwise, knowing what you're supposed to do and choosing not to do it doesn't make you morally better, it makes you worse. Well, my point is that they were proud not because of their great higher IQ. That was all that was. They were proud because they thought that they were morally better than everyone else. Because they are think themselves morally superior, this peasant upstart, relatively young guy, from Nazareth, here, out. How dare this peasant presume to tell the experts what really pleases God? Their position must be maintained. That would be forced to admit that one they thought of as just one of the organists. In other words, the reason they don't believe in Jesus is the kind of position. We are the experts. We know God. We know better than anyone else. Because this work, because of their pride, they cannot possibly ever admit, even consider the possibility that this one actually claims to be. Unless the person will do that. Maybe said these words. Therefore, they've already concluded he must be a false Messiah. What happens to not only their position, but to the people of Israel, if another false Messiah is not as a false Messiah, they are prone to do. The Romans will come and take away our place and our nation themselves. That is not, that is not, they're not crazy for being worried about that. The Romans did do that in the extent of 40 years later. How many people did the Romans kill and do that? According to Josephus, who sometimes exaggerates, but using his numbers as a view of the ballpark, they crucified 100,000 people. And they leveled the temple to the ground. And you didn't have to worry about some people anymore because they were all that. Yeah. That is not an idle threat. It is in fact what happened within one generation. And that is what they're trying to prevent. It's not only their position, their protection. It also talks about their home, slaughtering thousands and thousands of people. Every time Charlatan claims to be the one true king, it puts the entire nation at risk, not just their nation. But that means that they have two faults to prevent that. Both push them into doing what they're doing. That's pride. Pride of their own position is not to consider it. And the fear of man. So scary. If you're home, you should do what God wants you to do. God will do it. But it's pride of place and the fear of fame. The biggest why people also not believe today. People don't want to remain their sinners. Why? Well, you have to recognize it. Thank God. And even if they are willing to admit they're not good, sometimes they fear what their family will think. Or fear, what about my dead relatives? Can't think about it. There's a cat and relatives too. But was that any other people about? Can't believe you're alive. Well, so my point is the reason that Sanhedrin refuses to admit Jesus is really the same reason why. Secondly, trial, the Jewish trial. The daytime trial that Jesus that Luke narrates is just summarizing what they already determined in the middle of the night. It's basically just another step. They didn't say wrong. They don't care about what the charge is. They care about what charge they can make stick. They're trying to get Jesus to confess to being the Messiah. And then there's a problem doing that. Jesus has been so circumspect what he says that the other gospels tell us they couldn't find even made up testimony that would pass the test. What they want Jesus to do, it says, yes, I am the Messiah, the King of Israel. No, it's not different. Say he's the Messiah? Yes. That works. They get their confession, still not exactly what they want. What they wanted is an effective state, I am the King of Israel, you should back out of the book. Now, that's why they say in verse 67, 66 and 67, on day 10, the assembly of the elders of the people gathered together, with chief priests and scribes. And they led him away to their council, and they said, if you are the Christ, tell us. Not just here inquiring, are you reading the plan? No, they want him to confess to a political statement that he used for the Pilate. Well, Jesus first replies, if I tell you, you will not believe. Sorry. If I tell you, you will not believe. And if I ask you, you will not answer. In other words, I could ask the other. But from now on, the Son of Man shall be seated at the right hand of the power of God. Now, experts in the scriptures, they know exactly what has to be. This is alluding to. It is a measuring passage. It's Psalm 10, verse 1. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemy your footstool. Psalm 110, it is obvious. My Lord, David's Lord, is the Messiah. But once again, wording is replied in a way that an expert who can know exactly what it means. Yes, not only claiming to be the Messiah, he is claiming to sit at the right hand of God. He is claiming to share in the rule of God over the universe. They get both of those. Perfectly use that when they go into the Bible. Look at them. It's still, it tells them exactly what they want to know. Yeah, he's the Messiah. He says to them. And they go in. But they find something else. Oh, so you are the Son of God then. He said to them, you say that I am simply a polite way of saying that. Then they said, what further testimony do we need? Testimony? We didn't know. Testimony? What further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips. Charge is blasphemy. He's a man who's claiming to be God. But that is the charge that they had in the Jewish tribe. That is one of the serious charges you can make. It is absolutely useless. God of abuse. If they tried it, they would just laugh in their faces. Even if in a delicate position that he was in, that could stand up under the law, they notice. When they present their case to the Pilate, they didn't mention the in the Jewish tribe. That, according to the law of Moses, a genuine charge of blasphemy, this one, a real one, really is death. It's done. But then bring us, because their only goal is to get you. See, if every time you try someone, their nature or their actions that they can change you, that's a pretty good hit. Maybe stuff up, but yeah. So now that they have their verdict, they're going to go over to Pilate to get the execution that they're after. And so now they go and notice what they say. Then the whole company of them arose and brought him before Pilate. They began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man misleading our nation, forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king." There's three big to it. One, misleading our nations. The platform which means to corrupt. The idea is that they're accusing, they say that Jesus is bringing moral corruption to the people for Rome to rule over them. The character's going to that. He is actually doing the opposite. Luke 5:32, I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. Luke 13:3, I tell you no, but unless we repent, Jesus said, you will all likewise perish. He's smartly not corrupting people. He's actually going to people who are already corrupt and making them not corrupting. He's doing the opposite of that, and they know it. They're just making stuff. And in fact, he doesn't need to corrupt the people. They already are, as the said. Luke 9:41, this is a bit where that passes the demon out of transfiguration, cast the demon out of the boy, and the disciples couldn't do it, and Jesus comes into the circumcision of Jesus. Jesus entered and said, "Oh, faithless, perverse generation," same word, that would perverse the same word they accused Jesus of doing. "Oh, faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you and bear with you? My dear son here." Right here. Next. Yeah, the generation is already correct. He doesn't need to. In fact, that's the problem. That's why people haven't been believing in Jesus. Everyone wanted a Messiah. It's when they reject Jesus as their Messiah, it's not that they don't want a Messiah. They came along and claims to be the Messiah to get a follow. No, what Jesus was doing was saying he wants to follow him. He has to have a real relationship with God to do what's right. That's the thing that you get. They just want all the good things. They just want to be able to know all that. But there's not happening. So that's the first charge, but it by itself it's too vague to be. So they know they have to invent something else. So the second charge is forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar. Here's what Jesus actually said, and they tried to get him on this very point that very week. Luke 20:25, he said to them, "Render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." Not only did he not forbid people to ask Caesar not to go to the yes, he said that Caesar has a limit. His authority must be limited, where God's authority is not limited. And so when God commands you to do something, you need to do it in the mind what he says. But nevertheless, since the day by the day, regardless of the day, the person in power, Christians, you're obligated to obey the government. You have the right for rules. That's okay. Hold on. But you have to obey them. And that's of course the government. In which case you should obey God. That's what he actually said. So no, this charge is a deliberate, intentional fabrication. And then the last one, saying that he himself is Christ, a king. Notice they have to spell out what it means for Jesus to be Christos, Messiah. The Greek word Christos, Christ, means anointed one. The Hebrew word Messiah means anointed one. They're the same thing, it's the same word. Well, Pilate, as a Roman, isn't going to be familiar with the term Christ. It's not going to mean anything to him. So they define it. And they want to bring it out. It means to be king. Rome cared quite a lot about rival kings. So this charge is very important. Of course, notice Jesus did not actually say that. Claiming to be the Messiah? Oh, yeah. He actually said the words, I'm the Messiah? Well, no. And without this charge, they don't even have a case. So they put more direct words in Jesus' mouth than Jesus ever actually used. This is the one that Pilate will reject. And if you just read Luke's account, you're slightly confused. No, there's no rival kings. Jesus was accused of being a rival king of Caesar. So Pilate asked him, verse 3, chapter 23, verse 3. So Pilate asked him, are you the king of the Jews? And he answered, you have said so. Yes. And then Pilate comes back and says, no, this man is not right. Huh? How does that make any sense? The charge, Jesus is a rival king. Jesus answered, yes, I am. Pilate's response, this man is not a rival king. But you get into the details, it does make sense. Gospel of John is the one who gives us the details. Luke has compressed the accounts to fit everything he wants to say. And John tells us that he actually interviewed Jesus privately. In other words, when Jesus is interviewing Jesus on this question, he really wants to know if Jesus is guilty. Pilate is not trying to railroad Jesus. He really wants to know if this man is guilty or innocent. So John 18:33, beginning verse 3. Then Pilate entered the praetorium again and called Jesus and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? That's the question. That's the one that the majority ignore. And Jesus answered him, are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you concerning me? What Jesus is asking is he needs to know what kind of question Pilate is asking. Pilate is interviewing in private and trying to get the truth, and Jesus wants him to clarify. In other words, are you actually going to figure out if I'm including them in worship, or are you just trying to figure out what you're serious about? That's very important, because the answer to that question determines how Jesus answers the question. Pilate's reply, Pilate answered, your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done? In other words, no, fair enough. So I'm just trying to figure out, I'm just trying to get the bottom of that. So he wants to know if the charge was real. He doesn't care about worship with Jesus. Not thinking of worship. He wants to know, is the charge real? Are you really a rival king? Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If the kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so they should not be delivered to the Jews. Our kingdom is not from here. In other words, Jesus here says, I'm not the kind of king you need to worry about. And then he gives concrete evidence, proof, that Pilate can take to the bank about why Jesus is not the sort of king that Pilate is to about. He says, if I really was sort of rival to Rome that I'm being accused of being, my servants would fight. Here, but never mind. Jesus healed the guys from that, solved that job. But his evidence is that his disciples were not rising up in armed resistance against Rome to defend their master. And it is logical. A true insurrectionist would have servants, his followers would fight. That's what they would do to get that point, is to for Rome. So because my kingdom is not from here, that is, I'm not setting up a rival kingdom as another earthly kingdom. Jesus' kingdom is to replace all of the kingdoms. It is not another kingdom alongside of others. And therefore it is of no threat to. Well, again, Pilate doesn't quite understand all of that, but he really is trying to figure out the truth. The real interview where he really wants to know the answer. So Pilate therefore said to him, are you a king? Jesus said the word, wait a minute. All right, fine, but you did say the kingdom. Are you a king? In other words, Pilate is genuinely confused here. Because Jesus used the word king, I mean, that he was using it in ways of that. Jesus answered, you say rightly that I am a king. For this cause was I born, and for this cause I have come into the world, and I have been a witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. If you are a king, that's the problem. What? Jesus answered, yes, I'm a king, but I'm a king who is here to call everyone to believe the truth. Not here just to raise up an army, I'm here to persuade people to believe and hear the truth. Pilate said to him, what is truth? In other words, Pilate's tuned out. So you're having a philosophical debate. I'm not sure about philosophy. Just going to deal with this whole mess. Get people gone for that. He doesn't care about truth. One, when he had said this, he went out to again to the Jews and said to them, I find no fault in him at all. Pilate understood enough of what Jesus was trying to tell him that he realized that Jesus was his child. Okay. So if Pilate realizes that Jesus is innocent because he got more information, enough to was okay, Pilate probably going to be crazy, but so he goes back out to the people, thinking, okay, I found out the truth of this, I can tell you my verdict, I know what the truth is, and then we got the whole, right? I'm telling the truth in hell, because they don't realize. They don't allow the ridiculous lies that they were trying to say. Here's what they say. They were urgent, saying, he stirs up the people, teaching to all Judea from Galilee to this place. He said, this man's going everywhere, raising armed resistance. They say teaching because that's what they're doing. They want to think is, no, he's raising armed resistance everywhere. You have to do just wrong. Now, this is even more ridiculous than the last charge. Yes, Jesus taught, but he said nothing that Rome cared about. Now, Pilate was supposed to be the governor of Judea. That's his job. He's in charge. So why doesn't he just dismiss the crowd and say, well, I'm in charge and you're crazy. Get lost. The reason he doesn't do that is because it's pointless. The Pilate that first came to Jerusalem probably would have done that exact thing. Josephus tells us that when Pilate first arrived in Jerusalem, he brought ensigns, big banners, into Jerusalem which bore the image of Caesar. it as a god, as an image to a false god. That was a problem to the Jews. The Jews were offended because Caesar was worshipped as a god. So a large group of them came to Caesarea and protest. That went for 5 days. So yeah, he didn't care because he had to slow down a bit. Eventually, the objection was somebody got taken down, but not before a lot of conflict that Pilate could easily have not had just by listening to people. Some realize that your flexibility, I'm still in charge here, but conflicts, no, get rid of it. If Pilate had been out there, so that would have been a problem. Later, Pilate decided he wanted to build a 35-mile aqueduct in Jerusalem. So he just did what he would do in any pagan company, and probably didn't have the fun to build it. And you can imagine he didn't exactly go over very well either. Another major group of protest, Pilate orders his soldiers to arrest students, not the civilian blows, and filled with the crowd of the guy, that his command keeps club the offenders in the guy. In other words, Pilate's approach to ruling over the Jews was entirely tone deaf to the things they cared about. He was acting as a Roman, treating the Jews the same way he would treat Romans, but they're not Romans. They don't think like Romans. He didn't learn what was important to his people, and he did not care. So that's the kind of Pilate had here seems to have to go back to the direct unity. Because something changed, that's why. Because had received his post from a man named Sejanus, who had been a close friend of Tiberius Caesar. However, in 31 AD, Sejanus fell out of favor and was executed. Now, Pilate was offended and wanted to be executed. The political capital, Pilate had been relying on to keep his position is all gone. Next time, watching was going to be any candidate. And his rule at least, and probably end up him too. By about 3 years after the Spanish. So he was terrified of bad word getting back to Rome. He knew that because he hadn't been sort of anything like a priest leader, that he was there very thin ice. And so the religious leaders had to go a little better. Is Pilate had only taken the time to at least understand the Jewish worldview, and even if he doesn't agree with it, at least be sensitive to their what would have seemed him their suspicions, he could have built the relationship necessary to have a strong position to be able to do the right thing here. So the religious leaders just pushed him around by getting another protest. The next riot that was laid on Pilate in this position. By the way, the event did get Pilate axed out about 3 years later, but ultimate Messiah at the time of Samaria. The man of Messiah claimed to be able to join his followers, which think the vessels in my not words, Moses will not ever seen. Pilate and his soldiers as well. To get involved. The Samaritans, the way they rejected to Syria, were against that to Tiberius and the word of Pilate himself and everything. So, when the religious leaders pushed Pilate to do something about the king of the Jews, Pilate was terrified they're going to qualify with him out of his position. He's trying to get rid of this man without getting him in trouble. He's trying, and on, do so with Jesus. He's trying to be. He's trying to control the world. He might be trying to. He doesn't try to understand the people he's ruling over. He's a Roman. He's above them. His pride led him to develop a relationship he needed to avoid the predicament he's now stuck in. And once in that predicament, it was the fear of man that prevents him from courageously doing the right thing and not excusing a man, not excusing a man for innocent. Takes humility to admit you're wrong and takes courage to ignore the real man. These two things are barriers that keep many people from the Lord today. Vision is also barrier to the fullness of life. See, it's both humility and fear of God that is also the key to the life that is victorious. Of course, the question is not about the life, the victory should be the Lord and fearing. And those two things also be Christian living the life, living a victorious Christian life. So we find in this first part of the trial that same two faults that caused both of these groups, both the Roman, representative of the Romans, representative of the Gentiles, and Jewish leaders, and is the representative of the Jews, the whole world, and Jesus. They did so because of the pride and the fear of pain. This is also something we struggle with today. Sleep is pretty simple. It's so easy, but it isn't simple. It's humility and fear of God. Listening to what God says in His Word, having the ability to admit that we don't have that standard, and the courage to fear God even regardless of what people around you do. That kind of decision is the kind of courageous decision that will cause you, that will unlock the power to live a life that pleases Him and is from there. There is no other life for the Christian. We follow Jesus. Thankfully, most of us don't have this. Only a few of us have to give our life. But most often, God calls us to live for Him. But let us follow our Savior and be humble. In that regard, I think it is wise for us to resolve the thing, maybe Jeremiah.